Welcome to my jazz album review, Birth of the Cool and the Story of Miles Davis. Let's get right into it. Early life of Miles. Miles was born May 26, 1926 in Alton, Illinois, eventually relocating to East St. Louis, which so happened to be a happening place for musicians. A lot of genres are emerging out of the city at the time, such as gospel, blues, and jazz, and Miles was infatuated with all sorts of music at an early age. And at the age of 10, he received his first trumpet, and by 12 years old, he said music had become the most important thing in his life. The summer after he graduated high school, he had the opportunity of playing with Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker for 2 weeks, which further swayed him into becoming a musician and being, I want to do this and try this on my own, see how this goes. Let's get into Miles' new success and struggles. Miles was accepted in the school Juilliard of Music, but did not take interest into the classes. He often felt that what he was being taught was kind of useless and outdated and not up to the current state of jazz. And he often spent his time in New York clubs trying to get his name out there and trying to meet with other emerging artists such as Max Roach, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, or Thaddeus Monk. And he eventually dropped out of school and began playing with the greats up in Harlem, which is obviously a happening place for jazz at the time. And he eventually got invited to play for Charlie Parker's quintet. And at this time, Miles began to develop that signature sound of holding those notes for a long period of time and just start mesmerizing people. And you can also start to hear the hints of that cool jazz sound as well. And unfortunately, around this time, Miles went through a lot of struggles. He developed a drug addiction. He got into a car accident, which really messed up his hip and also messed up his voice as well, which most people didn't even realize he had surgery on. He didn't even tell anybody that his voice got messed up. He kind of just showed up one day and his voice was all scratchy. And he was battling a lot of hardships at this time as well while he was finding all this success. And going through the years, Miles was kind of on his downturn around this time. And in 1948, he left Charlie Parker's quintet. They had differences, and Miles also stated he wasn't being paid properly. And a couple years prior, Miles actually started a nonet and began playing with them after he left, and which kind of led him to signing a record deal with Capitol Records for an album to be recorded. And that album would be known as The Birth of the Cool. And the sessions to record the album started in 1949. And during this time, Miles was also to take a hold of his drug addiction for the time being, when his father actually forced him to kick it. His father drove him back from New York all the way back to East St. Louis. Miles pleaded with him and saying, I'm going to kick the drug habit, I promise you. And he eventually did for the time being, which was a good thing to help him have a clear mind for the music. Now let's get into the birth of the cool here. Recording for the album started January 1949. It took a year and a half and 3 sessions to complete, and by March 1950, the album was completed. There was a lot of interchanging musicians, and only 3 members other than Miles recorded in every other session for the album, which included lead nonets Jerry Mulligan and John Barber. The album was not released in its entirety till 1957. They dropped a few songs here and there between 1950 and 1957, but the full album wasn't released till 1957, and it had very positive reactions, and many critics cited the album as the catalyst for cool jazz and pioneering the new sound with the jazz scene, with, by the way, Miles was playing. It was kind of unlike anything people were hearing at that time, and it started a brand new wave. Miles wanted to derive from the bebop sound that he was kind of known for in his earlier years playing with Charlie Parker, and wanted to get something that was kind of smoother and cooler sounding, I guess you would say. Now let's get into the personnel and track listing of the album. There's a lot of players on this album, and the cool thing I thought Miles did with this album was he recruited a lot of unknown jazz musicians, aside from maybe Max Roach, to play on this album, which the Capitol Records thought wasn't a good idea, but Miles said, screw you, you don't know what you're talking about. And I kind of respected this because he kind of did it his own way. And Miles stated that he always liked to keep a younger generation or younger people around, like other musicians, to play with him, so they can always keep that creative edge that maybe older musicians don't have. Then it kind of helps him reinvent himself, which I thought was a really smart idea, and it really progressed his sound through the years, I would say. Now let's get into the track listing. There's a total of 11 tracks, and I will say every song is really good, but the songs with the asterisks were the standout tracks for me, probably the ones that I like the most. So let's get into that. Let's get into Jeru. It kind of reminds me of the Family Guy jazz backing tracks, if you kind of know what I'm talking about in the show. They always have kind of like smooth jazz going on in the back, and that song really reminded me of it for some reason with the trumpet playing. And I don't know why, I thought that was funny. And then let's get into Moon Dreams. I really like that song. He really has like a change of tone with his trumpet and played those drawn out notes. And the song actually gave me like a really sense of wonder for some reason. And I thought that was cool. And let's get into Venus di Milo. I really love the high notes and low notes of Miles's trumpet playing on this song. Kind of just goes up, down, and then the bass line of the song is amazing. I just love the dum 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 dum. Just the guy going up and down the neck playing. And Godchild, the intro with like the tuba playing at the beginning was really neat, I thought. And then Miles just kicks in with his trumpet right there, and they just start playing off each other. And then Israel, I really love the drumming in that. It just feels like the drummer had perfect timing with his tapping up the hi-hats on that song. And then Miles, once again, just kicks in with the trumpet, kind of plays off of each other. And overall, I just love all the tracks on this album. Provides a really nice listen. Now I'll give some thoughts on the album and overall feelings I have on Miles Davis. Overall, I really enjoyed this album. It was my first introduction to Miles Davis music. I've never listened to any of his stuff prior to this, and I was honestly just really surprised, and I will say I will probably be listening to him for the rest of my life. And the thing I can really respect about him is that he wasn't ever scared to try anything new with his albums, and I think that's part of the reason why he's so great, is that with this, The Birth of the Cool, he approached jazz with a whole new sound, with new musicians and a new way of doing it, and it kind of just, a lot of people were kind of confused at the time. A lot of musicians said, they're like, oh, this sounds unrecognizable and strange, but it sounds really cool, and it just caught on really fast. And I thought that was a really cool thing. And the album itself is a very easy listen. I'm currently doing final exams for my final semester here at UC, and I was listening to this album while doing my exams, and it just provided a sense of peace and gives me a sense of just being like laid back, and I can like focus like when I hear this album. And I thought that the feeling of this album gave me was really interesting. And overall, I think what Miles was able to achieve with this album is incredible. He battled through so much: drug addiction, hardships, going through car accidents, surgery. People would always count him out, and little did you know, Miles would come, boom, right back in there, do like he never left. He was always be able to create a new sound for new listeners to enjoy, and he will always be remembered as an influential musician in jazz. And another thing I'd like to say about him is I really liked how he propelled everybody else around him to be great. I watched the documentary that I watched on Netflix. It was a great watch, and he said, I've always brought around younger musicians so that I can keep my creative edge. They keep me going. I can always hear the new sound. And Miles was able to reinvent himself in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, and all the way to the 90s until he passed, because he surrounded himself with all these young guys to keep him going and just keep pushing. And I thought that was really respectable, because he didn't really care about just himself. He cared about pushing all these other younger musicians around him to be great in themselves, and that boosted their individual career as well and helped them out in the long run. And that just says a lot about who Miles Davis is and what kind of musician he is. And I think he's, without a doubt, is one of the greatest to ever do it within the jazz world. Thanks for listening.